The story began on a winter day, under the rain, when Débora went to her father's funeral. That day she felt cold and lonely, and all she wanted was for her own burial to be on a sunny day. Time passed and that day arrived, and at her funeral, her twin sister Irene did not shed a single tear. That's why people thought she was a fool with an inferiority complex. They even believed that, deep down, she was happy about her sister's death. Irene was always sickly and pitiable because everyone thought she didn't have much time left. One night, Débora, the heiress of the Mergen family, died shortly after fighting with her sister. The doctor examined the body and said her heart suddenly stopped due to poison. But suddenly, the girl came back to life. Although ironically, she woke up in her twin sister's body. Apparently, at the last moment, someone switched their places. So Irene died in Débora's body. Her family had that power, but Débora didn't use it, so it was Irene who did. The strange thing is that nobody knew why she wanted to go to a body that was already dying. It's also not understood why she hid that ability and let them treat her like a useless person. That's why, on the funeral day, Débora didn't cry, because she thought what her sister did was foolish. At the cemetery, people started murmuring that now no one knew who would be the Mergen heir. That same day, her cousin Abel returned from the war, who had always wanted to take the title of heir. At the grave, he appeared very affected by his sister. But Débora doubted he had nothing to do with her death. Another suspect was her fiancé, Prince Henry, because their relationship was only for convenience. There was no love between them, and that's why he seemed like the perfect fiancé. And since Débora is now dead, he will be compensated for breaking the engagement. Débora herself was so lost in thought that she didn't even realize she bumped into a tall guy. She immediately apologized for not watching where she was going, but he told her not to worry. And he continued on his way. That man's voice sounded familiar to Débora, and when she looked up, she saw Duke Raham Bajel in front of her. That man competed with Mergen for the neighboring lands, and everyone knew them as bitter enemies. But for some reason, he felt compassion for Débora's death and even attended her funeral. Débora looked at the three guys standing next to her and realized that her life had been quite good. And she was sure that each of the three had a good reason to kill her. Now Débora had a different appearance. Her skin was white and her hair pink, soft as a spider web. Added to that were large blue eyes, without shine or life. Many times she saw the face that belonged to Irene until that fateful night. That night, her sister came to see her with a small vial and seemed very kind. Irene explained that she brought her a healing potion that she had prepared herself as a gift. But at that moment, Débora didn't need it and asked her sister to stop wasting time with nonsense. Her rejection sounded quite brusque, and that bothered Irene, who didn't understand what she had done wrong. But Débora felt she had the right to behave that way because she was the strongest. Then she ordered Irene to stop complaining, that she wasn't the only one with problems, and that each one had her own hell. However, if Débora had known that this would be her last conversation, she wouldn't have ended it like that. Now she felt an itch on her hand and noticed something strange happening with the injection marks. Irene received these injections as part of her treatment for various illnesses. But now, Débora couldn't stay thinking about that. She wanted to find out who was behind her murder. And the main suspect was Irene, because she was the one who gave her that suspicious recovery potion. Normally, they say death is the end, but all family matters. And business were always settled by Débora. And now in her head, ideas spun like the gears of a clock, forming exactly those areas. Therefore, the first thing she had to do was save the body she had been reborn into. That meant she had to hide the fact of Débora's death from her grandfather. Because that death proved she was not worthy of the title of heiress, although he had other candidates. As for her cousin Abel, he was the son of Débora's stepmother, but he didn't have a drop of Mergen blood. That prevented him from getting close to heir status, while Débora was the legitimate heir. Irene had fragile health, and there wasn't much hope in her. Instead, Abel became a hero due to his great achievements in the war. And now his mother, Chloe, was trying to win over the vassals so her son could be the heir. Now Débora understood why her grandfather was so cold and calculating about this matter. Suddenly, she heard the maids whispering in the hallway. They said Débora had been poisoned, although there was also a rumor that she had taken her own life. Some couldn't believe the lady would do such a thing, and that's why they were confused. The girl had a lot to discover, but normally she always ended up in trouble. And for everything to go well this time, she decided to take it easy and think before acting. She decided to start her investigation in her old room, where that unpleasant episode occurred. Everything there felt familiar, so she quickly got situated and started looking for the vial. The one from which she drank the poison, but it wasn't there. Surely it had already been taken as part of the investigation. And generally, it was noticeable that no one had entered there, because everything else remained intact. Suddenly, Abel appeared at the door, and annoyed, asked how Irene dared to enter here. The girl turned around, not understanding at first why he was asking her those kinds of questions. He moved closer and, showing uncontrolled fury, demanded to know if she was the one who had killed Débora. This guy, of course, had his reasons to suspect Irene, but she immediately blamed Cell, saying that Débora's death suited him more. A couple of words from Irene were enough for Abel to show his true feelings and reveal his dark and foolish side. Irene did not deny having given her sister the potion she prepared herself. But that didn't mean it contained a drop of poison. And the girl continued pretending to be the weak and clumsy Irene, assuring that she wouldn't be capable of doing something like that. Everyone thought she didn't have much time left, and no one saw ambition or desire to be the heiress in her. In fact, the family rather ignored her. But for some reason, Abel decided that this girl was dangerous. It was strange, because he was almost always at war and barely knew Irene. The girl decided to end this pointless conversation and headed for the exit. But Abel abruptly grabbed her arm, which truly angered her. However, he warned her that if she turned out to be the murderer, he would break her neck himself. For some reason, he began to openly show his hostility towards her, and that was nothing like the Abel that Débora knew. Although back then he was just a child, and now even his expression was different. Even so, Débora showed him no fear. On the contrary, she dared him to touch her if he dared. And to confuse him further, she pinched his chin softly. That enraged Abel. But Débora wanted to verify something that way. Abel hid his claws to counteract his stepmother's greed. And Débora wanted to confirm her unsettling suspicions. For a while, she couldn't stop thinking that this boy was as rotten as his mother. Then the girl left. And Abel was left thinking about his deceased sister, not understanding why she left this world so soon. He thought that in that place, which looked like a tomb and where even breathing was hard, she would be the first to lower her coffin into the pit. He would have even been happy if that were the case, and he couldn't believe something like this had happened to Débora. Little time passed, and the counselors gathered, convinced that it was time to choose an heir. The family's grandfather didn't understand why everyone was in such a hurry, since his girl's body hadn't even cooled down yet. But the counselors insisted, and pointing to Irene's fragile health, they only saw Abel as the heir. Besides, he was a war hero, and everyone should be grateful for his bravery. The old man remembered again that only 4 days had passed since Débora's death. That she was the heir before, and that for 10 years she served the family with all her might. And honesty. Abel's mother, Chloe, was also present at that meeting, noticing how the situation had completely changed by then. Since she remarried and crossed the threshold of that house hand in hand with her young son. 11 years have passed, and now she reaps the rewards of her effort after her husband's death. The old man's hopes of maintaining the lineage fell apart, and she stated that they really didn't have time for mourning. Then she added that, instead, it would be best to look for the culprit. At the same time, she knew that the main suspicions fell on her, and she wanted to dispel those doubts. Declaring herself not guilty, the lady added that Abel was on the battlefield, and Naru at the academy at that time. Thus, she implied that the culprit was none other than Irene, because she also had a right to the inheritance, but the head of the family assured that the girl was not interested in that. To the other vassals, who clearly also suspected Irene, he reminded them that the girl was very sick. They, hesitatingly, pointed out that the last thing Débora drank was a potion from Irene, although the poison could also have been in the tea. That only angered the head of the family even more. But at that moment, small heels were heard and Irene entered, apologizing for interrupting the meeting. She simply overheard their conversation so loudly that she dared to intrude. One of the counselors, Vermont, tried to politely dismiss her, but Irene refused, since they were talking about Débora's death. Moreover, they were also talking about her, and since she was a suspect, she asked for the opportunity to defend herself. That same counselor who wanted her out of the room got truly furious and stood up from the table. He shouted that she had no right to be there. Then Irene asked him to say who did deserve it. Of everyone present, there was no one whom Débora hadn't caught red-handed. Especially Mr. Vermont, who was caught trying to reclaim a looted merchant ship, for fear of being discovered. Gavion also had problems due to his uncontrollable passion, and Mr. Mills was discovered stealing. And Yuskin also conducted his shady business because of his problematic children. Débora understood that since the day of her death, the situation had only worsened, but now she had to clear Irene's name. It also became clear that everything she dedicated her life to served no purpose. Then the girl addressed her stepmother, Chloe, saying that her words needed no further explanation. For a moment, everyone in the room fell silent. Only a few coughed uncomfortably. Afterwards, the grandfather confirmed that there was no one there whose weakness Débora hadn't discovered. And he promised to do everything possible to catch the culprit, asking the other vassals not to meddle in the matter. They started protesting, and the old head of the family stopped them with all his fury. After that, they made all the counselors leave, and the old man asked Irene to say what she wanted to say. He also noticed that the girl seemed like a different person. Besides, they hadn't spoken alone in a long time. She wanted to confess that she was actually Débora in another body, but that wasn't the type of person one could entrust with such a secret. She remembered him as a strict mentor, who always demanded that what was started be finished. After all, being the leader is not easy, and one must assume responsibility for hundreds of people from other families. And he used to scold Débora, because sometimes she complained about how difficult everything was for her. But now the old man looked different. He had become sentimental over his granddaughter's death. Moreover, it didn't seem like he wanted Irene to be blamed for the murder. The girl said she did not intend to claim the heir position. She only wanted to save her useless life. Even if the grandfather ordered her to leave the mansion, she would obey without protesting. The only thing she asked was that he protect her from the woman who was her stepmother. Débora understood that those she had led, turned into insects, would easily devour Irene as soon as she died. She considered that her entire surroundings were rotten and did not want to return to that place. However, the grandfather said that one who carries Mergen blood does not have to leave. He himself did not think it correct to make Chloe's son the heir. Débora thought the grandfather was just testing her, but she also didn't want to stay in that hell. She also didn't want to leave Irene's body there, in case she could return to it someday. She didn't want her corpse thrown into a septic tank and decided not to bind herself with promises. A little later, Débora felt tired, although she had only attended the meeting all day. Now she understood how difficult it really was for Irene to live with such a weak body. Suddenly, she heard a noise and thought someone was spying on her. There wasn't even a hidden weapon in the room, so the girl ordered whoever was hiding to come out. Behind the curtain, there were indeed some men hiding, and one of them was the counselor. They had no choice but to come out. And Vermont cursed because the girl had woken up too soon. Débora remembered his face well. He was a vassal of the Mergen family, but also the stepmother's right-hand man. The girl was shocked to realize they were coming for her, while Vermont got angry because she acted as if they didn't know each other. Then he ordered his assistant to act, and he covered Irene's mouth so she couldn't scream. Vermont prepared a syringe and reminded her how she had humiliated him in the meeting. But by his behavior, the girl understood that this wasn't the first time this had happened. He noticed that Irene was too rebellious today, but he still didn't intend to stop. Débora realized his evil intentions, and finding a vase, she struck the assistant on the head with all her might. Of course, the guy immediately fell to the floor. And Vermont only shouted at him to get up. But Débora placed the broken vase on his neck and threatened to slit his throat. Seeing the girl's strange behavior, Vermont even doubted it was her. And she asked him to open his eyes. Suddenly, the counselor shouted that because of Débora's death, everyone had gone crazy. Before, Irene gave her blood without issue, but now she seemed possessed. Débora demanded explanations, squeezing the piece of vase so hard that her hand began to bleed. The counselor was surprised that for 10 years she had only kept silent, and just now started asking questions. Débora remembered the puncture marks, but she always thought they were due to the treatment. And she never gave them importance. But apparently, Irene was going through something her sister couldn't even imagine. For 10 years, she had to endure the indifference and cruelty of those people. Now Débora decided, whatever the cost, to find out what the hell those bastards needed her blood for. Vermont explained that there was great power in that blood, and then asked her to stop playing hard to get. He took a few steps towards the girl to get another dose, but she only pressed the glass harder against the man's neck. In an angry voice, she ordered him not to come closer and assured him that she would truly cut his throat. Débora felt no pity for him. After all, he was just a piece that sooner or later they were going to discard. However, now she had the perfect opportunity to find out what had happened to Irene. Afterwards, Débora said she didn't intend to give her blood again. And she warned that if she ended up killing that man, all the blame would fall on the counselor. Moreover, she reminded him that the worst punishment awaited him if she also died, just like her sister. Then, Débora ordered him to leave if he understood, and didn't want to have to dispose of a corpse. In the morning, when the maid entered her room and saw the bloodstains on the floor, she got very scared for her lady. But she just laughed, as if nothing had happened, and asked the maid to remind her of her name. It was Colleen, and she had been working as a maid for Irene for a couple of months. That was because Débora's sister's maids changed all the time. But now she was curious to know where Colleen had worked before. And when she learned she had played in a street orchestra, that past seemed very interesting to her. Then, Débora remembered cutting her hand on a broken vase the night before. And she asked the maid to put a bandage on it. She immediately got to work, asking how the lady got the wound. And Débora, still smiling, explained that it had only been an accident. At the same time, she noticed that the maid had a very gentle touch and was very good at healing. Then, Colleen confessed that they informed her that the lady gets bruises on her hand twice a month. That was true. But Débora didn't feel like talking about that, and asked Colleen what instrument she played. She mostly played the drums, although she wasn't very talented at it. Now Débora understood why her hands were so strong and agile, and it was noticeable that she had firmness. The girl knew that a recommendation was needed to get that maid job. And suddenly, Colleen fell silent. Débora had to wonder if her stepmother or her brother Roosevelt had a hand in that. After all, for Abel, they would do anything, and they might well have assigned something to that maid. The lady demanded she confess exactly what it was, but Colleen suddenly knelt at her feet. And she started apologizing without lifting her head. Then she explained that she had a younger sister she took care of because she was very sick. And the medicines were expensive, and that Colleen only had to report on how Lady Irene was doing. But she never thought of harming her. Débora found that reaction strange, that the maid told even what she hadn't been asked. But she kept swearing she didn't want to cause harm. And besides, looking at Irene, she always remembered Débora. The girl understood that this maid was not entirely on Chloe's side, otherwise she wouldn't be so careless. Then she asked Colleen to stand up and not worry, because she didn't intend to punish or fire her. On the contrary, she was even grateful that she had told her that information. And then she confessed that sometimes she needed a break and would appreciate it if Colleen kept some small secrets. But to not put her in danger, she asked her to keep reporting on her. And about today, she should say that Irene hurt her hand due to a sudden attack, and that now she was trembling with fear. Meanwhile, Vermont informed Chloe that Irene had gone mad and told her what happened that night. Knowing how fragile Irene was, the stepmother found it hard to believe, and the counselor reminded her of the past meeting. He felt that the girl had taken some pill and completely lost her mind. She had such a lively look, and a person cannot change so suddenly unless they have gone crazy. Roosevelt admitted that yes, it is strange. But after Debora's death, who protected him, he would also be shaking with fear. Chloe agreed that there was no other way to explain Irene's silly behavior that day. And perhaps they simply underestimated her all this time, because even if only partially, she is still the daughter of a predator. Then Roosevelt suggested that Débora might have been training her sister while she was still alive. But in any case, the deceased Débora can no longer hinder them. And Irene herself won't be able to do anything to them. While they were talking, Colleen knocked on the door. She entered and explained that she came with a report. Even so, the maid's voice trembled slightly, although she tried to hide it. For her part, Irene decided to inspect her sister's room more closely and find out what she was doing there. She started by searching the desk, and in one of the drawers, she found a music box with some gloves. Next to it was Irene's diary, and Débora read the first entry when she happened to run into her sister. It was a lucky day for her, because she noticed that her sister looked better, although that hardly removed her worry. Still, Irene thanked God for being, at least for now, in good shape. And she felt relief for that. Débora tried to remember when she had said something like that, but she understood that this detail was important to her sister. She felt something strange. It was the first time, and she didn't like it at all. That feeling was more like guilt, but she continued reading the pages anyway. Afterwards, Irene wrote that she saw squirrels stuffing their cheeks with nuts. And in the garden, she saw a bird with a broken leg. And it hurt her to see that she didn't even have the strength to cry. So Irene decided to take care of it until the leg healed, and even thought about giving it a name. Also, Irene was very afraid of the night. The room was stained with blood, and she wanted to pick flowers to cover the smell. Then more birds arrived, and now the sight looked much better. She considered herself foolish and useless, although she knew she should be grateful for all this. Irene also dreamed of being like her sister. And those words hurt Débora. She wanted to hide from those who despised and deceived Débora. After proving her innocence, and since she doesn't know when Débora will return to this body, she sees no reason to go back to that hole. But immediately, another idea occurred to her. She had to arrange it like revenge. Débora stopped. She wanted to tell her sister that anyway, she couldn't live like her. But even with a predictable ending, to compensate even a little for the lost time, Débora decided to stay here in her place. Later, Elliot Rifflin came to see her, having already finished the Imperial Academy with his family's support. He was one of the family's allies and Débora's assistant. But it was the first time they met since she ended up in her sister's body. The boy politely greeted Irene. He had come to tell her that the head of the family wanted to see her. Moreover, she had to accompany him immediately, which seemed strange to her. But she accepted. Débora was curious to know why her grandfather was calling her, but Elliot assured her that he seemed quite calm. And when he asked for his granddaughter to be called, she was with young Master Abel. The girl kept thinking, and suddenly Elliot stopped, admitting that the young lady had changed in some way. But she understood that people who knew her sister well would notice certain details anyway. After all, she couldn't completely hide her way of being, her habits, nor even what her dominant hand was. She and Irene were sisters, but they didn't look alike at all. Someone might think that Débora's ghost entered Irene's body. But the truth is that this body is no longer Irene's. And the girl decided to take full advantage of that, since she planned revenge. But she told Elliot that she was simply affected by that sad incident. Then she hurried him to go with the grandfather, so he wouldn't have time to think otherwise. And Elliot followed her, apologizing for crossing the line. In the room, the grandfather and Abel were waiting for her, and upon entering, she saw that both had rather serious faces. The old man wanted to bring them both together. Débora noticed that he had some papers in his hand and understood they were going to talk about work. Abel looked at her with the usual look of annoyance, because he never liked that girl. the head of the family asked his grandchildren to sit down and explained that he had called them because he needed help. He said that for now, the problem of Debora's vacant position cannot be resolved, and that all hope rests on the two of them. The girl understood that it was urgent if the grandfather had decided to trust Irene. And able for this, the old man handed her a contract with the imperial family regarding mineral extraction rights. That was exactly what she used to do, but now she had to handle the process of breaking Debora's engagement. Abel, for his part, would take care of rebuilding the Mergen family's private army. According to the contract, that army is on the border to protect the empire from the barbarians in the desert region. Abel told the grandfather how he planned to do it, and his plan was exactly the kind of idea the old man would like. Débora actually didn't feel like helping with the Mergen affairs, but she was the one who started this. And if she continued with that work, she could better think about where to start her revenge. Besides, she no longer had to strive to gain the support of that family. Because, against all odds, seeing what was happening from another perspective turned out to be much more fun. After a brief talk, Débora and Abel left the head of the family's office. On the way, the girl guessed that the grandfather was planning a bird hunt, and she was curious to know who they themselves would turn into. She meant falcons or dogs and tried to pretend to be as kind as Irene. But it didn't go very well, because when she looked Abel in the eyes, she couldn't react otherwise. And she immediately decided to change the subject, saying that surely he would feel as comfortable as in the war. Because this was also a kind of battle. The boy clarified that he accepted this mission not to win Mergen's favor. That place holds Debora's will, and he just wants to take care of that while everything else falls apart. Then Abel asked Irene to stop meddling, because she probably wouldn't be able to understand what he felt. The girl even stopped in surprise. She knew Abel, but she didn't expect that answer. And while she was thinking, Elliot saw her, who already knew she had been given a mission. He decided to offer her his help and proposed arranging a meeting at the imperial palace. The idea seemed quite reasonable to Débora, and she asked him to take care of it. But internally, she wondered why Abel had returned, as if he truly wanted to be the heir. A little later, Roosevelt congratulated his sister, because his son had been entrusted with taking care of the army. Because that meant a lot. Chloe's brother also thought that Abel would be the next heir. Their conversation was interrupted by Abel himself, who needed to talk to his mother. Roosevelt was happy to see his nephew and congratulated him on the important mission, a sign that he had the family's favor. But he had also heard that the head of the family had called not only Abel, but also Irene, to whom another task had been given. However, he thought that breaking an engagement was nothing compared to army matters. And he believed there was nothing to worry about, because Irene was just acting as a scarecrow. And soon they would cast her aside. Roosevelt wasn't even sure if that girl could handle such a simple task. Shortly after, Débora invited Prince Henry to a meeting at her house. He offered his condolences for her sister's death and commented that, since then, time had passed as if years had gone by. Débora met this man, Henry Wilton Lutenia, for the first time when she was 10 years old. Since then they were engaged, but the prince became like a desert. Impressive, but empty and ruined. Now, she met with him to talk about breaking the engagement, but the prince thought it was still too soon for that. It seems like he is trying to take control instead of the real owner and seek his own place in the sun. During the conversation, His Highness, as always, was smiling. But Débora was curious to know what he was hiding this time. The prince was also intrigued, because Irene was specifically handling the engagement matter. And she explained to him that in these matters, it is better for a family member to participate, and not a vassal. Débora realized that His Highness despised her sister. But now it seems he doesn't even try to hide that disgusting attitude, as if she were just a nobody. However, Débora can forgive him that, because she doesn't care what his family gains. And just as she was about to start reading, the prince asked her not to hurry, that he could wait while having tea for as long as necessary. The contract he brought seemed too strict to the girl. Débora thought about adjusting a couple of dozen clauses, and the prince noticed that something was bothering her. She pointed out the clause where it stated that the contract to exploit the mine, signed after Débora Mergen's victory, would be annulled. The girl thought that exactly that clause made no sense, because the mineral extraction rights in Barando were not a gift for Débora's engagement. So it makes no sense to annul the contract if it was signed fairly after the auction. However, the prince himself assumed that this could only be considered a side effect of his engagement to Débora. Irene protested, since it was her sister who offered the highest sum and the contract is not in her name, but in the name of the Mergen family. So Débora's death cannot be a reason to break that agreement. His Highness noticed that the girl in front of him clearly hadn't stood by idly. Then Henry admitted that the imperial family no longer had reasons to cooperate with the Mergens. The prince himself knew that family well, so he only used it for his own purposes. His relationship with Débora was beneficial to both, and only for that reason they stayed together. But there was no attachment or loyalty between them. The girl understood that the prince wanted to break all ties with the Mergen family, at any cost. He even insinuated that in the relationship, there might be deep sadness or love on his part. After that, Henry returned to the carriage, and there his assistant asked him how the girl had reacted. He quoted her words, that it cannot be called love if there is no attachment or loyalty. Now he was sure that in the Mergen family, there was neither kindness nor that mysterious power left. He felt no love, just some kind of possession. Even when he saw Irene, he asked her if she herself had tried to achieve anything, because she spoke to him as if she knew him very well. She only confirmed that he preferred congratulations over words of comfort for Débora's death. To that, His Highness replied, and even said that Irene was mistaken because, contrary to what she thought, a feeling of loss over his fiancée's death pursued him. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot shake off that horrible feeling that he has lost much more than he had. Thoughtfully, Débora lowered her gaze, understanding that he was not going to back down, and promised to notify her when everything was decided. Henry had also thought about it, but now he changed his mind, because a new variable appeared in front of him. Débora didn't understand what he meant, so the prince suggested to Lady Irene that they discuss everything from the beginning. And now he confessed to his assistant that he thought there was nothing interesting left for him in Mergen. But it seems that is not the case. Its mysterious power disappeared. Lady Débora is dead, and surely the next head of the family will be Abel, who has returned. But His Highness, for some reason, was convinced that the heir would probably be Débora's twin sister. The assistant was surprised, because the vassals had already decided everything, and the heaviest thing Irene had held was a flower. But Henry understood that the Mergen family sent Irene on purpose, because renouncing a blood tie is like hurting oneself. Its blood power and that mysterious force, which they say has already disappeared, remain sacred to the people of the Empire. If they lose their legitimacy, Mergen will collapse like a sandcastle when attacked by other families. And His Highness is sure that the head of the Mergen clan does not want that to happen in any way. This family has to recover, so they won't be knocked down when they stay still in one place. Meanwhile, Débora tried to understand why His Highness changed his decision in just a few hours. Besides, she knows him well now, and suspects that Henry plans to take much more from the Mergen family. Shortly after, Elliot came to see Débora again and handed her another task from the head of the house. Now she had to take care of the matter of the mine in Barando, and the girl was very surprised. She understood that the prince had something to do with it, but she didn't understand why he wanted to do something so senseless. Moreover, she didn't have time for the family's problems, because she wanted to find out the truth about her death as soon as possible. And to top it off, the papers still don't have the imperial seal. It seems Henry knows that nothing good will come of it. Elliot confirmed her suspicions. His Highness wants to keep the mine without signing any contract. And the person who will replace Mergen will be none other than His Highness, Archduke Rahan. The next day, Débora noticed that her hand had swollen a bit in the sun. When Colleen saw it, she got worried and reminded her that the lady's skin had always been sensitive to sunlight. And today the sun burned even more. So Débora understood what had been bothering her sister all this time. The maid reminded her that she should have brought a parasol to protect herself from the sun. Débora agreed, realizing that Irene had an illness that only affected some members of the family. Her mysterious power came from a magical forest. But upon gaining that power, people also received a family curse. An illness called the Mergen curse. Now the forest's power had disappeared from Irene's body, but the curse remained. Débora tried to understand why that happened, while Colleen suggested going back for the parasol. But the lady refused, as they had already walked quite a bit, and upon seeing a nearby shop, she decided to go in to buy parasols. However, she didn't want to go in herself and asked the maid to call the vendor. Colleen agreed and quickly entered the place, while Débora decided to look around a bit. In the shop window, she saw a pair of black gloves, which at first glance looked quite normal. And just as she was about to take them, she accidentally bumped into a young man. He apologized, but Débora said the fault was hers, so she decided to start choosing a parasol while her maid was not back. A paper one caught her attention, when suddenly that young man suggested she look at other models too. His voice sounded very familiar to her, so Débora decided to look at his face to make sure who he was. Archduke Rahan was undeniably in front of her, but it was unclear why he was there or why he acted as if they knew each other. He kept saying that a lady of noble family should not walk around with a low-quality umbrella. Débora, averting her gaze, replied that the value of a thing depends on who needs it, and that now she needed something lighter, so a bamboo parasol would do. Débora noticed that this guy was still just as arrogant and didn't even try to feign politeness. Rahan, for his part, realized that the girl was more practical than she seemed. But he reminded her that the parasol could be taken by the maid. Now she was curious why he was trying to give advice if he had nothing to do with Irene. So she pointed out that he himself was about to buy something that didn't suit him. And it seemed to him that she knew him. Débora admitted that they both knew each other by reputation, so introductions were unnecessary. In fact, she knew him very well because he was the current emperor's half-brother, and the man who inherited the Vahel surname. He was a free spirit, the son of the former emperor and the illegitimate daughter of the Vahel family. He had no status at birth and conquered that family solely through his talent. It was rumored that the blood he shed dyed the entire river red. But now, by sheer coincidence, he had run into Lady Mergen, and the girl's mind was racing because he approached the stall if he already had a pair of gloves. She suspected that he wanted to make the conditions for a future purchase clear. Moreover, the lady did not believe in coincidences. At that moment, the vendor came out, and upon seeing the Archduke, he greeted him first. Then he asked if the shoes he bought recently fit him well, and he said he was just coming to pay. Now he had come for a few more things, and the vendor promised to send everything to his mansion. Just like the last time. Débora realized that the Archduke was a regular customer here, and she even felt a little ashamed of everything she had said. Glancing sideways at him, she convinced herself that Irene meant nothing to him. Unlike Débora. Suddenly, Rahan asked the vendor to also put a parasol on his account, which annoyed Débora quite a bit. But the Duke explained that he just wanted to give a small gift to relax the atmosphere. Then he said goodbye, and the girl was furious, as if the guy had given her charity. Her maid noticed she was tense, but Débora asked her not to worry. She also told her to move on, before exhausting themselves, even before reaching the mine. On the way, she thought they had behaved as if they were going to devour each other, and it even felt awkward to separate like that. And when they arrived at the mine, they ran into Rahan again, who even joked about coincidences. Knowing she couldn't avoid it anymore, Débora decided to resign herself, but act more carefully. In his hands, the girl noticed the gloves he had recently bought at the shop. And she understood that he needed something disposable just to be at the mine. Rahan confessed to the lady that it wasn't the first time he had been there, but that since his last visit. Many things had changed. And now he intended to participate in the auction, because he knew the contract was not yet closed. But Débora replied that if he truly thought so, he wouldn't be here. She herself knew quite a bit about that mine, because she had been tasked with handling the matter. The Archduke was even surprised, and she became even angrier because he kept mocking Irene. After all, he knew nothing about her, but he treated her with less respect every time. And suddenly, he blurted out that there was probably no competition, because only one person was participating in the auction. And although many aristocrats wished to acquire the mine, Rehan didn't understand why this role had fallen to him specifically. Although he admitted that none of them could compare to Débora, and that made her happy. At least they still remembered her. But the problem was that she and Rehan had been enemies since childhood, and now she felt a little uncomfortable. The Archduke also noticed that he was talking too much today, and confessed that seeing Irene brought Débora to mind. Then he asked, and the extraction rights would be auctioned again. The girl replied that it wouldn't happen, that it was just rumors, and that the imperial family just wanted to get rid of the mine. Suddenly, Rehan started doubting whether the Mergen family could manage this without Débora's help. The contract between their families was for 5 years, but the Duke didn't mind if it ended a little sooner. The girl noticed that whatever the topic, Rehan always ended up remembering someone from the past. Débora was gone now. Irene was in front of him, and she was the one who was going to make decisions. This is how she tried to make clear who was in charge. Because if she allowed herself to be treated as a mere replacement, it would never end. Suddenly, the Duke looked her up and down with a mysterious air, as if assessing merchandise he wanted to buy. He was only curious to see how she would manage. If with such a weak body, she couldn't even hold an umbrella. Débora became even more indignant, but just as she was about to reply, they were interrupted. The Duke's assistant approached, asking if she wanted to continue inspecting. But Rehan decided that it was enough for today. Then he prepared to leave and bid farewell to Lady Mergen. She, sarcastically, wished him a good trip, as if she had just kicked out an annoying guest. As Débora watched him leave, furious, the mine manager approached her. Upon learning that he had a representative of the Mergen family in front of him, he called the other workers. He ordered them to accompany the young lady, who wanted to inspect the place, and to help her in everything she needed. But when the Archduke reached the horse and saw how Irene was received, he muttered that the workers treated them differently. It seems everyone is now talking about who will take care of the mine after Débora's death. More and more aristocrats are visiting the mines, and the attitude towards the Mergens has completely changed. This family is treated as if they were gods, but I don't think it's because of their business talent. They hired the townspeople as miners and paid them a good salary. And they didn't just work hard for the mine, they also helped the entire town. The Duke didn't understand why spend so much energy just to keep the mine. Besides, no one knows how long this family can maintain their business. Rehan remembered Irene's words, that she might not have gotten into this if she thought a 5-year contract was enough. After all, Mergen blood runs in her veins. But today, the Archduke decided to put feelings aside, knowing they would meet again anyway. And Lady Mergen explained to the workers that they shouldn't worry, because this had nothing to do with whether Débora was alive. Or not. But the people couldn't ignore it, and they admitted they regretted Débora's death. And that everyone present owed her a lot. The girl understood that there were people here who truly mourned her from the heart. And after saying a few words of consolation about her, she announced that she would now take charge of the mine. Suddenly, a man in a white suit interrupted her and demanded an explanation of what she was doing there. It was Uncle Mills, who was extremely surprised to see Irene in that place, and when he found out that the head of the family had sent her. He almost died laughing. He was curious what the family would turn into if the grandfather named her heir. And she was a bit surprised to see him arrive at the mine so elegantly, dressed all in white. Suddenly, Miles changed the subject and said he was very happy to see his dear niece. The uncle warned that if she said even one word about him to the head of the family, he would tear out her tongue. Débora understood that he was still upset about what she said the first time she spoke at the meeting. Now he advised her to stay calm, or better yet, to get married, so as not to die suddenly like Débora. Hearing this, the girl thought that he might know something about her sister's death. Although she always knew, he didn't have the courage to kill someone with his own hands. Millie's only commented that without Débora, it was like being without a sick tooth, and he asked Irene not to stay long and not embarrass the family. After that, he hurried to say goodbye, and when he walked a few steps away, Débora asked the butler to explain the uncle's visit. He confessed that lately this man had been coming every day accompanied by other aristocrats. A few days later, she met Elliot again, who was worried that she might overexert herself. He had heard that she had visited the mines recently and that it must have taken a lot of energy from her. Then, he handed her the Imperial Palace negotiation plan. She had to review and mark the points that needed changes and sign where everything was fine. With those papers, Débora went to the office and even felt a little lost, not knowing where to start. On the table, she saw a hair tie and thought about tying up her hair before working. But that was a habit of the old Débora, so she decided to leave her hairstyle as it was. Then Elliot entered, explained he was going to help her, and asked her to ask him if anything was unclear. She accepted and started reading, but she noticed that the guy couldn't stop glancing at her. Perhaps he simply doubted that Irene could do everything correctly, so Débora decided to reassure him. And after a while, she asked him to check her work. Of course, the papers no longer looked very presentable, but that was because she had read the document very carefully. However, Elliot liked her work, and the girl, thinking that was all, prepared to leave. But the assistant stopped her and explained that part of the papers had to be redone. Starting from page 7, she signed as Débora. The girl realized she was so focused on the work that she completely forgot. And now she had to invent an excuse. She started stammering, searching for words, but suddenly Elliot asked her not to explain anything. Of course, he had many questions, but he allowed her to answer when she was ready. Still, Débora understood that this guy had already discovered her secret, and he reminded her that Lady Irene is left-handed. And it seemed strange to him to see her holding the pen with her right hand. That detail also worried Débora since she woke up in Irene's body. Her habits were noticeable in things like being right-handed or not, and also in her food preferences. And more. But it is impossible for anyone to give up their habits overnight. Débora understood that if she acted like a child, everyone would ignore her. And yet, she was careless enough to give herself away. However, she couldn't explain everything to Elliot yet because she didn't know what would happen next. And she asked him to forget it. On the way back from the office, Débora reproached herself for her carelessness and thought she had to be more careful now. Passing through the hallway, she saw Abel in the garden under a tree. But what surprised her most was that he wasn't there just to get fresh air. That boy had gone to visit her grave, and she even felt uncomfortable noticing that the grave was visible from the mansion. But she only wanted to be buried where her whole family rests. And now her breath catches feeling that, even after death, she continues to serve her family. But looking at her cousin, she couldn't understand why he was behaving so pathetically. After a while, Débora wrote a letter and asked Colleen to send the fastest messenger. She understood that it was a very important letter. If the lady personally sent someone, Débora only needed the wisdom of her great aunt. And when she asked for the letter to be sent, she did it in the garden. And it was then that she happened to see Abel. That was the corner of the garden where Débora went when she needed peace. But now that boy occupied her spot, although she couldn't ask him to leave, because that place no longer belonged to anyone. So she suggested to the maid that they go to the backyard, where she could rest a bit. At that moment, Abel noticed the girl and thought she was avoiding him. Then he asked her why she had gone to the mines, but Débora didn't plan to give him explanations. Abel assured her that he didn't want to reproach her for anything, he was just curious to know how bad things were there. Knowing that a normal conversation wouldn't come out anyway, Débora couldn't just ignore him. She wanted to leave, but her heart wouldn't let her. So she changed the subject and asked him how the troops were doing, because it's not easy to control those soldiers. The boy confessed that it was the first time someone had worried about him for something like that. His task was to reorganize the private army, but he had only dealt with squadrons based on loyalty. From his expression, the girl noticed that he was not having a good time. After all, Debora's death and her arrival had only brought more chaos. The boy got a little annoyed, but controlled himself and prepared to listen to Irene's opinion. She said that the private army of Mergen has nothing to do with brave knights. These warriors have strength, but it is strength bought with money. But she also noticed that Abel now feels very proud of his surname, and advised him not to expect unity or loyalty from a private army. You can do business with them if you give them what they want, which is money. Fame does not matter to them. Abel was a bit surprised that Irene helped him, but she explained that she simply does not trust his abilities. It seems that bothered his cousin, although he himself always tries to provoke her. And she asked him how he plans to work for the good of the family if he was never really part of it. Abel counterattacked by saying that she never cared about family affairs, and that now it seems she took off her mask. As they talked, they got so close that it seemed sparks would fly between them. And then Débora asked why Abel had really returned, thinking that what he wanted was power. But another reason for his return could be revenge, just like in her case. However, the boy clarified that what he seeks is no longer here. He looked at the grave and also hinted that Irene showed her fangs, because she herself wants power. It seems he decided that, after his sister's death, he now has a great opportunity. In reality, Debora's priority was revenge, after she decided to stop helping with Mergen's affairs. It was hard for her to see her family crumble, although that seemed quite strange to her. But when she calmed down, she realized she wanted to destroy Mergen in Irene's name. And for that, it would be better to gain the family's support, because she herself wanted to end that lineage. And she explained to her brother that it would be great if the world knew the name of the one who conquered the Mergen family. Abel noticed that Irene had changed, but she could say the same about him. And as he left, Abel said that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't achieve anything. Débora found his abrupt change of mood strange, because just a moment ago, he almost died wanting to kill her. But now her favorite spot was free. And if she had known, she wouldn't have made Colin try so hard. Just then the maid returned with a small blanket, and Débora decided to go with her to the backyard, where she could rest a bit. In the garden, Débora half fell asleep, and she realized she was already asleep. But her mind was still awake for some reason. She couldn't move her body at all, so she doubted if she was truly asleep. She heard someone say that Irene had awakened, but that she was no longer Irene now, and that she and her sister always shared the same light. Débora didn't understand who they were or what they were talking about, but they kept saying it was safe there. That person was also happy that they had finally met, although she didn't hear them. And Débora thought she was having a strange dream, but in the end, that dream turned out to be a harsh warning. Being with Colleen in the garden, Débora heard a noise, but only she could hear it. Now, Lady Mergen thought that, along with the weak body, she had also inherited mental problems. She started going out for walks more often, to get better used to the sunlight. Then, suddenly, she decided to go further and see the place where Colleen lived, because she would also like to see her family. She had planned to do some things, but today she was going to enjoy a picnic in the backyard. Suddenly, the maid screamed worried about her lady, but she asked her if tomorrow yes. Or yes, she had a medical checkup. It wasn't a bad idea, especially since Débora planned to invite a new doctor. After the checkup, he prescribed an ointment to boost her defenses. And he also recommended stopping everything she took before, even if they were very expensive medications. The doctor looked at the old prescription and couldn't understand who could have prescribed something like that. He was a little nervous telling everything, although no one else was there. But he admitted that, apart from low energy and a weak immune system, the lady had no other health problems. Now the girl didn't understand why she was always sick, and the doctor explained that it was due to the effect of other medications. Especially if you take them for a long time. That is practically a death sentence. And Débora realized that it was Chloe who was shortening Irene's life. Although before she thought she was just using her. And the medicine Irene was taking is used when they want to drain or destroy the powers of people with abilities like Mergen's. Now Débora also understood that the voices in her head were another effect of the medications. She explained to the doctor that the voices sounded like the wind when you wrap yourself in a blanket. And the doctor assumed that the problem was not the medication, but rather her mental state. And since the voices are heard mostly in the garden, it means she has sad memories there. The doctor prepared to leave and left his prescription with Débora. At the door, she ran into Elliot, who was coming to see the lady. He also commented that changing doctors was an excellent decision. Then he reported that, thanks to Lady Mergen's great work, all the documents were delivered in the morning. And His Highness, the Crown Prince, scheduled an appointment for her at noon in 3 days. The girl understood that indigestion awaited her, and then she asked Elliot to investigate Uncle Miles further. He can start with his recent movements and finish by checking even the dust in his house. That means checking everything thoroughly. Débora wanted to ask him for something else, but then decided she could handle it herself. Then, just as she promised yesterday, she went for a walk with Colleen to her house. In the hallway, she ran into her stepmother, who noticed that Irene has been running around everywhere lately. The girl explained that she was just doing her duty, although in reality it wasn't what she wanted. Then she asked Chloe if they had found the culprit who killed her sister yet. But it was Roosevelt who answered that the head of the house was in charge of that, and that he was more concerned about Chloe because she already has too much on her plate. Moreover, he didn't like the tone in which the girl spoke, and she shot back that she had learned many things lately, even about herself, and then, as if nothing, she added that she still intends to learn manners. And more seriously, she reminded him that Mr. Roosevelt himself does not respect them either. He got furious and told her she was crazy, but Débora also had a comeback for that. She explained that she is simply mourning her sister and that everyone experiences grief in their own way. Suddenly, Chloe confirmed that yes, everyone goes a little crazy in their own way. And again, Débora wanted to put her in her place, but suddenly she had a strong cough that almost didn't let her even stand up. She realized that the coughing fits occurred every time she encountered her stepmother. And she, as if threatening her, told her that she didn't need to rush to live, because she only had one daughter left. Then she left with her brother. And behind them, looking back, went Abel. Débora thought that if Chloe was going to behave with such brazenness, it would be easier for her to threaten her with a knife. A short time later, Lady Mergen went to the guild, which does not fear dirty work. She noticed that they were in a decent place now, although before their base was in a very dark corner. However, even now, Débora decided to leave Colleen outside that building. She only took her as a companion, because with such a weak body, she couldn't protect herself alone. And besides these people, no one else will be able to fulfill Débora's mission. Just as she was about to open the door, a hand gloved in black reached out for her shoulder. And the girl shivered upon seeing, unexpectedly again, Archduke Bagel. He himself was a little surprised to run into each other in the most unexpected places. When she asked him why he had come, Rahan explained that he was there for the same reason as her. He was curious why the girl made that face, if she herself wanted to hire people for dirty jobs. But understanding that it would be awkward to meet more acquaintances there, the Duke suggested they enter together. Débora still didn't understand why he needed that external help, since he already had an important title. And it was she who needed external strength. Inside, Master Solomon greeted them kindly, both the Archduke and the beautiful lady. Débora was the first to make her request, but the guild master asked her to wait a moment. He didn't want to discuss business in the lobby, so he invited them into his office, where everything was quiet and spacious. Seated on a rather comfortable sofa, Débora expressed her desire to explain the commission. Solomon noticed that her character gave a very different impression from her appearance, because noblewomen usually beat around the bush. But she gets straight to the point. Still, he prepared to listen to the reason why a lady from the Mergen family had come to see him. Débora was surprised that he already knew who she was, but he knew everything, even the shadow of the Mergens. Then, the girl asked him to watch one of Mergen's vassals, named Vermont. Solomon immediately assumed she wanted to kill or injure him, but Débora had not come for that. Upon understanding what she was looking for, The guild master asked her to at least tell him an approximate reason. He has to calculate every step, and the more provocative her story, the better he can plan everything. That guy seemed somewhat careless, but in a guild like this, they are very selective with missions. So Débora decided to tell the story objectively. Then she clarified that she only needs to correct the behavior of those who torment her and take everything away from them. That man works for her stepmother, Chloe, so his position is quite stable. Besides, that vassal likes to show off his money. That's why he's always surrounded by bodyguards. And all Solomon has to do is take everything this man has. Money, family, and even his smile. Absolutely everything. Even the smallest thing. After that brief story, Débora expected the guild master to accept her request. He agreed, and now it was Débora's turn to ask. She was curious because the Duke, who was in another corner, was also listening to her story. Solomon was a bit confused because they had arrived together, and Rahan said he was simply curious. But the girl realized that the Duke did not have as close a relationship with the guild as she thought. Later, Bajal confessed to the guild master that he had a similar request, and that it was also related to the Merjan family. But he was just curious to know what was going on. Because after Débora's death, interesting things started happening. The girl listened to his account, but understood that he was actually seeking some benefit for himself. The Duke himself asked Solomon for a discount since their requests were similar, and they could be merged. But he refused because he didn't think it was right to spy on the Merjans in front of one of their members. Then he passed her a tablet with the document and suggested she sign the contract. At first, Débora thought the Duke was just talking nonsense to mock her. But now she saw that it wasn't like that. That man is either an idiot or simply very enthusiastic. And he doesn't hesitate because he sees no danger in Lady Merjan. And when the Duke signed the contract, he passed the pen to Débora to do the same. Upon signing, she asked Solomon to take a third of the Duke's sum, because the information she provided is very valuable. Rahan decided to joke with the girl about how badly the Merjan family was doing with money. But she didn't reply. Moreover, the Archduke noticed that this girl had become quite whimsical, as if she were another person. After sorting out matters in the guild, Débora returned home and devoted herself to recovering her health. After several treatments, Colleen noticed that the lady's skin looked much better. The girl also noticed it, because she stopped taking those medicines, and with that the ringing in her ears disappeared. It was only necessary to suspect that the problem was not her body. But now she didn't understand why Irene suffered her whole life. If everything could be solved so easily. Débora regretted having always been indifferent to her, but now it was too late. And she couldn't bring her sister back. Then Colleen reminded her that His Highness the Prince was due to come today, and Débora asked her to prepare a suitable outfit. A banquet was planned for Abel's return, and the girl wanted to know if Henry would also go to the party. Knowing how busy he is, especially in the house of his deceased fiancée, he probably doesn't even feel like eating. But on the other hand, he is an unpredictable person and could accept without any problem. Thinking about what was coming, Débora asked the maid to choose a dress for her in shades of gray. That surprised Cullen, because the lady usually prefers colorful clothes, which also suit her very well. She didn't want to see Débora as a gray little mouse, but she asked her not to worry. That she had planned it that way on purpose. The girl simply didn't want to draw attention in an environment where she herself didn't feel comfortable. Moreover, the difference in tastes between Débora and Irene also influenced this. When the young lady was almost ready, she asked Colleen to bring the office seal. Something she had completely forgotten about. The maid ran out to find what was forgotten, promising to return so quickly that the lady wouldn't even notice her absence. Débora would have to use both hands at the reception. It would only be complicated if she had to write something. So she decided to avoid signing or doing anything impulsive if she could. Suddenly, she heard the maids arguing about who would clean which area. One of the voices sounded familiar to Débora. It was that of the maid Luna. She had always worked for Débora when she was still in her own body. It seems this girl is still in charge of her room. That's why the argument was, because she wanted to clean it herself. Débora wanted to talk to her, but when Luna saw Lady Irene in front of her, she became clearly nervous. Not just nervous, rather she started trembling with hatred. And as soon as the lady took another step, the maid drenched her with dirty water from the bucket she held in her hands. It turns out she thought Irene had killed her lady and now couldn't stand her for a second. And when she saw her approaching her dear lady's room, Luna thought she was coming to steal something. Abel witnessed this scene, appearing suddenly from the corner. Meanwhile, the maid tried to add a few slaps to the dirty water, but Abel managed to grab her hand in time. Immediately, furious, he demanded an explanation of why she had thrown water on someone without knowing who it was. But Luna kept resisting, trying to free her hand. Then, Abel threatens to cut off her arm up to the elbow if she didn't calm down. Obviously, she didn't want to lose her hand, but she had nothing to say to justify what she had done. Although she wanted to scream how much she hated Irene, at that moment, Débora asked her to calm down. Then, seriously, she told the maid that she herself should put her head in a bucket of water to cool off. Luna tried to answer her, but the lady didn't want to listen and ordered her to go to her room. Then, she told her to take a hot shower and sleep well. With that phrase, Irene reminded Luna of Débora, who always treated her the same way. But Débora was already dead, and the maid thought the lady was just mocking her. Then, she asked her to think what advice she would give to Lady Débora if she knew she was planning revenge. Abel, meanwhile, didn't say a word. He listened attentively, as if watching his favorite series. The young lady, now calmer, asked Luna to wash her face and have some tea to calm down. For it to work better, he recommended it be jasmine. Confused, Luna simply ran away, taking advantage of the moment and letting go of her hand. When she turned the corner, Abel thought that maid deserved a good punishment for what she did. But now he was sure that, because of so much hypocrisy, the family name was tarnished. To that, Débora replied that if a single maid could tarnish the family's honor, it is better to lose such honor. Simply put, that girl was very sad about the lady's death. Although Abel believed that this did not give her the right to harm her master. Seeing that her brother was upset, Débora asked him to put away his sword, because it wasn't worth shedding blood over anything. In any case, the girl's dress was completely soaked and weighed a lot. So she decided to go change. At the same time, she understood that Luna was only suffering because of Débora's death, whom she had always loved very much. Suddenly, someone brought a handkerchief right in front of her face. Looking up, she saw His Highness in front of her, who had noticed how miserable and soaked she looked. And she realized that a handkerchief would certainly come in handy for her, but it seemed that even amused him. The girl got a little annoyed, because she had just gotten rid of one idiot and already had another one in front of her. Henry explained that he was just looking around and couldn't imagine running into that scene. And he worried that Irene might get cold. Nevertheless, Débora excused herself from him for a while to go change and apologized for having to make him wait. But the prince asked her not to hurry and added that he could wait as long as necessary. His attitude made Débora think about him again. Before, he hadn't shown any respect towards Irene. Apparently, concern and compassion took away his desire to discriminate against her. The prince continued on his way and soon saw Abel, whom he was even glad to see. His Highness confessed that today's visit had seemed quite amusing to him. He couldn't imagine that all the women of the Mergen family were so surprising. But in Abel, he noticed that he was quiet today, as if trying to hide what he truly felt. His Highness had that habit, observing people and drawing conclusions about their true nature. And he became curious to know why Abel's gaze towards the prince was always full of rage. It seemed to him that the answer lay within Abel himself, but at that moment, he had no way to find out. Still, His Highness was sure that it had something to do with the late Débora. Abel just looked seriously at the prince and then went to greet the head of the house. Henry wished him luck as he left, mockingly hinting that he would have more work here than on the battlefield. The prince, for his part, decided to spend some time having tea. Very soon, already seated at the table, His Highness saw Irene, but now in a different dress. He liked this dress more than the previous one, and the girl apologized for making him wait. But the prince wasn't bored. In fact, he truly enjoyed the show, and then he praised her tea again. Débora didn't understand why His Majesty was so kind today, although he was surely just pretending. Henry promised he wouldn't send her to trial, and she realized he had overheard that conversation. He himself asked the girl to relax a little, because not everything should be divided between personal and public matters. He didn't mind if they asked about her affairs, told stories about her life, or even worried about each other. But for Débora, all that was personal and the prince's concern made her suspicious. Then he confessed that he felt compassion for her. Then he noticed that the room was decorated with Débora's favorite flowers. And he even knew they were called forget-me-nots. The girl realized that he knew Débora's tastes well, and that surprised her. And the prince explained again that there are things people don't value, but when they disappear, they feel empty. It could be a pair of leather gloves, a ring that Débora habitually wore, or her writing pen. It seems Henry saw all that almost as works of art, although at first it made him uncomfortable. Suddenly, he said that abandoning a habit and adapting to something new is exhausting. And when the anger passes, that feeling of emptiness arrives, while understanding appears out of nowhere. Listening to his philosophical reflections, Débora couldn't tell if the prince was angry or if he felt lost. Even she herself was surprised to be listening to such nonsense being the topic of conversation. Henry continued saying that taming someone is not a one-way process. And while he thought he had managed to control Débora, in reality, it was he who ended up tied down. Still, the girl didn't understand what His Highness meant by all that, and he clarified that this is called a feeling of loss. It seems he understood it too late, and Débora asked him not to look for meaning in what can no longer be changed. With that harsh sentence, she reminded the prince of his sister again. When he was only 13, Débora told him that the name Lutetia meant nothing. And he felt extremely ashamed. That's why, one day he decided he could overcome that barrier. But now, he understood that he really just wanted to be respected. His Highness confirmed that there is only one step from love to hate, and that now he himself was on the side of hate. Saying that, Henry even felt a certain relief. From what he saw, he concluded that Irene was treated with contempt in that house. Her half-brother simply ignored her blatantly, and even the maid dared to throw dirty water on her. But he had a way to fix her situation, and incidentally, solve the problem of the broken engagement. Débora didn't even suspect what he was talking about, and His Highness proposed changing fiancés. Now Irene was to get engaged to him. It was so unexpected for the lady that for a moment she was speechless. She just looked at the prince as if he were crazy. It is totally immoral to propose marriage like that to the twin sister of the deceased fiancé. But Henry didn't see anything wrong with that. In the end, he sought his own benefit and hoped Irene would accept. After a while, the whole family gathered in the large dining room, something they hadn't done in a long time. Although in reality, even before Débora's death, this happened very rarely. The prince noticed Chloe, who seemed much better than the last time he saw her. The lady thanked him for the compliment, but Débora understood that those words had another meaning. Shortly before dinner, Henry asked Lady Mergen if she accepted to get engaged to him. The girl got angry, but His Highness thought it was an excellent way to recover the business. That was in danger due to the broken engagement. The prince mentioned that it is not uncommon to change a family member to save polygyny. But Débora already knew that. She just couldn't believe that the crown prince himself dared to do it. Moreover, because after breaking the engagement, His Highness could gain much more. She tried again to convince him to drop that idea and end the breakup once and for all. But she realized that something was escaping her when he said they wouldn't lose anything if they announced the marriage again. But according to the law, a Mergen heiress with the power of the forest cannot marry the emperor. Because the newlyweds must have the same status, and Henry is not one to settle for being just a prince. Therefore, his engagement to Débora harmed his career for the throne. But since Irene was not born with the power of the forest, he can gain Mergen's support, and at the same time not give up the title of emperor. And now that Débora is dead, he needs a new ally, who for him will only be a toy. The lady is sure that, if that were not his intention, he would not have proposed marriage to the younger sister of his deceased fiancé. Henry recalled that, although Débora's death affected him, their relationship only consisted of using each other. His Highness stood up and leaned toward the girl to look into her eyes better. Her eyes burned with rage, and seeing them, Henry realized that Irene and her sister were not as different as he thought. In that gaze, he saw not only coldness, but also the desire to crush and destroy everything. Then he asked the girl to think carefully about his proposal, and promised not to pressure her for an answer. During dinner, Henry also mentioned that it was a great joy for the family that Abel had returned from the war as a hero. Among the prince's companions, there is no one who could fill the role of commander. And he is even envious of the head of the family. Then he went straight to say that someone like Abel would be a highly sought-after match. And when such a person becomes the head of House Mergen, they will surely forget all their worries. The grandfather, however, declared that the matter of the heir was not yet decided. The prince disagreed, because even the peasants in the fields comment that it will be Abel. His Highness advised not to ignore the opinion of the people, but the old man assured that the Mergens would know how to manage on their own. At that moment, Chloe's face changed so much that it was impossible to describe it in words. She herself wanted it too, but she politely explained that this was not the place to discuss those topics. Instead, it was better to congratulate Abel, because he fulfilled the task entrusted to him. So, Chloe decided to calm the situation. It turned out she had great political instinct, something Débora never imagined, and the grandfather agreed with her grandson's achievements, understanding that it was not easy at all. Abel himself got nervous and confessed that there had been discontent in the group over his sister's death. But everyone remained firm. Unintentionally, Abel became the hero of the day, and then Chloe mentioned her younger brother. Nersu. Unlike Abel, that boy is talkative and short-tempered. Débora thought that's why they might even expel him from the academy. Chloe wanted to strengthen the second son's position and assured the others that he would bring great benefits to the family. But the old man, with a calm face, asked the woman not to jump to conclusions. She didn't want to accept that, because she thought Nersu's skills could be well utilized. Débora couldn't help but cough, as if hinting that she had never heard anything so absurd. But she attributed it to the strong smell of pepper. But Henry saw nothing wrong with it. He thought that everything happens for a reason and clung to that idea. And regarding his interest in the affairs of that house, he had a very simple explanation. After all, they are like a family, so he simply cannot ignore it. At the same time, His Highness looked at Abel intentionally, as if expecting him to confirm it. But Abel saw no point in His Highness's words, because Débora is already dead. Débora herself also tried to understand what the prince was thinking, but those conversations took away her appetite. After the meal, the girl asked to speak privately with her grandfather, and confessed that Prince Henry had made her a proposal that left her confused. She wasn't in a hurry to say it directly, thinking that her grandfather had already guessed everything. She herself didn't believe that Débora's marriage to Henry and Irene's marriage to Henry were the same thing. Moreover, now she was even disgusted by the thought of the two of them going to the altar together. The young woman didn't want the fate of being puppets of the imperial family for herself or for Irene. The head of the family himself also found that proposal dubious, because it could damage His Highness's reputation. However, if that marriage took place, House Mergen would avoid major losses. Besides, he was already Débora's fiancé. But the girl thought that was only for the fight for the throne. In the end, her conversation with her grandfather, as always, led nowhere. Then he declared that she was nothing like Débora. And besides, Débora was the Mergen heiress. And if the prince married the head of the family, he would end up tied hand and foot. But at that moment, the girl understood what her grandfather had planned from the beginning. That's why he instructed her to break off the engagement. The head of the family proposed making Irene his successor, although the others did not believe in her abilities. The vassals thought she could never handle it, but now she had an option. If she didn't want to become the prince's fiancée, she could become the heiress of House Mergen. Now Débora has to play a difficult game, and she wanted to choose the lesser evil. Besides, another plan was forming in her head. She realized that her grandfather's ambitions, her stepmother's greed, and the contempt of others would lead her. And Irene upwards. Now she even looked forward to that moment. Late at night, when the bright moon rose in the sky, Débora went to a secret meeting with Solomon, with whom she had already come to an agreement. The boy didn't arrive empty-handed and was ready to give the lady a preliminary report. He decided to handle this matter personally, something he only does in really important cases. Débora thanked him for the effort. She even liked being treated like a valuable client. Everything seemed to be going well, but the girl wanted to ask him another question. Pointing to the Duke who had just appeared, she asked annoyed why that guy was there again. Solomon reminded her that they both had similar requests, which could be considered as one. Moreover, the Duke paid most of it and they couldn't leave him out. Rehan also confirmed that this meeting included the matter that interested him and that he could not ignore it. Still, Solomon asked the lady not to worry, as the reports had been prepared separately. As soon as she reviewed the documents, the girl noticed that the master had done a great job. There was even more information than she expected, especially regarding the shady dealings. All the information was reliable. The guild even managed to find very old cases. There was nothing they couldn't uncover. It turns out that Vermont had no qualms about throwing a lavish party right after Débora's funeral. The guild members started investigating thoroughly, so they managed to find out everything, even the smallest detail. Then, Débora asked the Duke if he was satisfied with the work he had received. He confirmed it, although he hadn't even touched the papers, which made her doubt if he had really been at the meeting. Then Débora confessed that Vermont would visit her soon and asked Solomon to protect her. He happily agreed, and Raham promised to pay whatever was necessary. He decided to take care of that too, since he had paid for almost everything anyway. Except for the commission, and a small sum wouldn't change anything. It sounded as if the Duke was about to do charity. Then, Rahan calmed the young lady's curiosity, saying that his actions were nothing more than a simple investment. The girl was even a little bewildered, although this man had always been unpredictable. Furthermore, he left the imperial castle and became the head of a family that turned its back on him. He also resigned from his post in the National Assembly and called himself a businessman. Among the aristocrats, he became famous for his rebellious nature. He was one of those who broke with all common sense. Débora suspected that this was why he attracted the attention of that dangerous man. But it was she who chose that path full of obstacles. Still, it remained a mystery why Vahel treated Irene with such kindness. The Duke only smiled charmingly, and if the lady wanted answers, he suggested they discuss it over a drink. Débora shot him a look of disgust, as if he were flirting with her. If the situation were different, and she didn't understand why this amused him so much. It turned out that lately nothing more entertaining had happened to Rahan. Their argument made Solomon a bit uncomfortable, and Débora, apologizing, asked that next time they meet alone. The master accepted, although he himself was between a rock and a hard place. So he decided to clarify once and for all what they were talking about. After the conversation, Débora agreed to meet him in 2 days and prepared to get out of the carriage. Then she noticed that the Duke was already outside and offered her his hand in a very gallant manner. Even joking. He told her she could only get down if she allowed him to kneel for her. Débora didn't understand which knee he was referring to since he was offering her his hand, but she accepted his help anyway. It was completely dark outside because the meeting was exactly at midnight, and the Duke confessed that he was a little nervous. The girl was curious to know why, but Rahan didn't rush to answer. Instead, he asked her why ladies need to identify every emotion to feel better. Débora didn't want to explain it because she didn't believe their relationship was that special. But she admitted that she knew the Duke quite well, since in the Empire even the strayest dog knew him. And it was true, even the children on the street talked about Vagel. Moreover, Débora noticed that since he took her hand, the Duke was in no hurry to let it go. And he held it tightly. Suddenly, Ran confessed that he would like to know more about Miss Mergen, and she told him that, with what is written about her in the guild papers, she already had enough. But he wanted to know more, because not everything is in the documents, and that was starting to annoy Débora. Because she knew Vajel well. She knew that for him, it was nothing more than an interesting spectacle, although she appreciated his compassion. The Duke wanted to know why she thought she could fight for the title without help, having such low self-esteem. Realizing that Rahan had already understood everything, she asked him what he gained by supporting her. He, putting on an innocent face again, said it was the opportunity to have meetings and conversations like this with Miss Megrin. That meant that, regardless, he would be delighted to help her. But Débora was not sure he would agree if she asked him to give up the mine. She knew that material value was also important to him. When suddenly, Rahan gently took her hand. And then, in a low voice, he told her he agreed to give up the mines. He brought her hand to his lips, as if they were in a true romantic novel. And he promised to give her everything she desired, believing that it was truly worth it. It's logical that any girl would melt in such a situation. But Débora was different. Suddenly annoyed, she let go of his hand and, frowning with rage, called the Duke crazy. She explained that they couldn't be allies because their interests overlapped. And that, obviously, would lead to competition, but Vahul saw the situation differently. Still, Débora didn't forget that the Duke was 30% of her problems. He had always competed with Débora, so someone like Vahul could never be her partner. Suddenly, Rahan remembered that Irene would soon be the heiress, but she showed him what had happened to her sister. He touched a sensitive nerve, and carried away by emotions, she shouted at him to go mind his own business. For a moment, the Duke paused thoughtfully, because he had been scolded with those same words before. She was an unusual person, who strongly reprimanded him, and advised him not to meddle where he wasn't called. And with those words, Irene reminded him of Débora, and she realized that once again she had unintentionally shown her true character. To smooth things over, she explained that it was a family tradition. Then she looked at his black hair and intense red eyes, and remembered how much his audacity always bothered her. However, they always met whenever they wanted the same thing, and that made her feel uncomfortable. Hoping the Duke had no more questions, Débora prepared to enter the house. Suddenly, the Duke stopped her and wished her a good night. And he also told her that he hoped to appear in her dreams, which she found repulsive. Her face twisted with indignation again, something that even amused Raham. Once in the mansion, she couldn't calm down and went out for a walk again. Due to the chaos in her head after the shock, she unintentionally reached the door of her old room. There were some things piled up right at the entrance, but Débora didn't feel like dealing with that now. She went out to the garden, realizing that she was thinking more and more about the days when she was herself. She struggled to face things she preferred to ignore before, but she didn't know if she wanted to go back to being who she was. And now she felt very ashamed in front of Irene. Today she just wanted to rest, after learning everything that had happened to her sister. Thinking about that, Débora reached a small lake where Abel was sitting on the shore. That was the place Débora always escaped to clear her thoughts. However, Abel's presence made her nervous again. He didn't even turn around. He just kept looking at his reflection in the calm water. He only reacted when Débora commented that at night, that lake looked like a piece of sky brought down to earth. Then, realizing that her half-brother also couldn't sleep, she thought maybe he wanted to jump into the water. And she remembered that deer sometimes came to this place to drink, and that she herself had seen one once. That animal didn't flee, it just kept watching the person. It even seemed to her that, with its deep gaze, the deer wanted to tell her something. But now the deer will be scared if it sees a corpse floating in the water. Abel couldn't understand why he worried about Balsh Ego, sister. About him or about the deer. Then, Débora confessed that this place meant a lot to her, but she understood that she wasn't the only one visiting it. That place was also part of the estate's lands. For a minute, everyone was silent. And then Abel admitted that he had found out from his mother about Irene's engagement. and he was curious to know if his sister would accept that proposal. Débora thought it was nonsense to sign a contract before going to the battlefield. To Abel, who previously thought she didn't care about the heiress status, her words sounded as if her life was at stake. But you never know when the breaking point will come, and the brother understood that they had already become enemies. The girl even felt a little pity for Abel, because he had become a victim of his mother's greed. And surely his heart was already empty, because the higher he climbed, the more he lost what truly mattered. Afterward, Débora asked Abel not to try so hard, because everything would end very soon. And when that happened, he wouldn't get anything. She simply didn't want him to end up with nothing, having given everything, just like what happened to her. Then Débora prepared to leave, but was chased by a strange feeling of déjà vu. And then she remembered that she had met Abel there before, when she was still in her own body. That time, she also thought that Abel was going to die in that place. The next day, Débora overheard an argument between two vassals in the meeting room. And one was reproaching the other for his incompetent work, and previously, all that used to be free for the other. Simply because Débora always covered for him. It seems that in that chaos, nothing changed. Twice a month came the reporting day, and everyone spoke loudly. But that was only a tactic to hide their own weaknesses and divert attention to something else. That's why these two vented like that, and only stopped when they saw Lady Irene. One of the vassals immediately got indignant, because the lady entered here without being called. He even used the example that, if it were like that, anyone could be the successor, even a cow. Débora explained that she came with the report on the matter her grandfather had assigned her. Then she asked them to leave Abel alone and lower their voices so she could continue working. Noticing also the furious look of the head of the house, the vassals fell silent. Those people had behaved badly towards Débora, but now she could enjoy her little revenge. And the grandfather expressed his hope that no one would interrupt just because Irene and Abel were present at the council. First, he asked Abel to present his report, and he prepared the documents. To resolve disagreements within the army, he reviewed the system of ranks, salaries, and rewards. He also established the basic principles of priority for knight ranks. Among the soldiers working for Abel, he chose those who wanted to join. Débora, listening to the report, thought it was good work, but it wasn't what her grandfather expected. Abel also said that if they drew too much attention, the government could use any moment to subdue them. And use them. Not even Débora had foreseen that scenario. Continuing with the report, Abel believed that now was not the right time for that. And shortly after the war ended, they would go to replace the fallen troops. But the grandfather didn't believe the emperor would subjugate the private army of the Mercians, because only they protected the borders of Gekla. And suddenly, Débora understood that her brother put the interests of the family above the empire itself. And the cavalry. Still, this deserves respect, and the grandfather decided to entrust him with solving this problem. The vassals began to applaud happily, thinking that a new chapter was opening for Mergen. And they praised the title Abel justly earned as a war hero. Débora sincerely congratulated her brother on the title, although it sounded quite dry. Because she never saw a trace of tenderness in him, and the grandfather proposed continuing with the meeting. Now it was Irene's turn to report on how things were going with the mine in Barando. The girl immediately said that the business was currently causing too many problems. After her sister's death, a considerable sum of money was lost in a short time. This news annoyed the head of the family, and he wanted to know if they had already found the person responsible. In reality, too many people are involved in this matter, and Débora needs time to figure out who took the money. Furthermore, if the problem is taken seriously, the stolen funds can also be recovered. Débora agreed to take responsibility and handle the search personally. But first she asked for authority to manage the extraction business, which shocked the vassals. They didn't believe she could do it alone, and thought Irene just wanted to get rid of them that way. It was an expected reaction. But the more agitated they got, the more it suited Débora. Then she added that, at the end of it all, a new person in charge of finances would be needed. In other words, Débora thought it was time to change the system itself. Chloe finally mustered the courage to speak, saying that Irene had changed for the better. The lady noticed that the girl was trying hard, and that her health had also improved. Débora explained that she simply liked the work, and that her body tolerated it well. But Chloe found that strange. And she remembered that when Débora was still alive, Irene was as if on the verge of death. But now she had suddenly come back to life. The stepmother tried again to blame Irene for her sister's death, but Débora saw no point in continuing to talk about the culprit. Then the head of the family intervened and said they could resume the money issue tomorrow. For now, he wanted to know how the construction of the merchant ship was going. The vassal reported that the repairs were finished, and now they were looking for a suitable shipyard. But Débora wasn't very interested in that. She was happy that her grandfather supported her in her matter. Late at night, Kaylin noticed that the young lady had prepared black men's clothing for herself. But Débora, in a calm voice, explained that it was to strengthen her health. The maid might have believed her. But the suspicious mask next to her wouldn't leave her at ease. So Débora agreed to tell her, but it would be her secret. So not a word to Chloe's. She also assured her that she would sleep soundly in bed and that her whole walk would only be in dreams. The maid felt like traveling with her lady, but she couldn't enter her dreams. And Débora, clarifying that nothing would happen to her, asked Colin not to worry. In reality, she wanted to find her people as soon as possible, since she still didn't get along well with Solomon. Leaving through the window, she went on horseback with Elliot, but after a few hundred meters they had to stop. Because the lady started feeling very dizzy. Elliot worried, because if he had known, he would have brought a carriage, and Débora realized she had greatly overestimated this body. She didn't understand why she felt so dizzy, since her assistant was guiding the horse all the time. The boy started attending to the lady, although she already felt a little better. And almost let slip again that she couldn't get used to all this. When they arrived at the location, they hid among the bushes behind the trees, waiting for the knights to pass. They passed at full speed, and the girl thought they did it too quickly. Elliot explained that they are professionals, and they don't need much time to crack a safe. Besides, they themselves were a bit late because of Irene's health condition. Débora asked him not to remind her of that, and then prepared to sneak over the wall. But Elliot doubted whether the lady could overcome that obstacle, because it could be fatal for her. Smiling slightly, the girl assured him that everything would be fine, because she planned to use her assistant's back. And then she asked him to kneel down by the fence. Meanwhile, Uncle Miles, who is no saint, was trying to figure out where the lady got the information from. And now, to change all the account books, a lot of time would be needed. While the man was angry because the girl even dared to threaten him, they informed him that the master wanted to see him. At that moment, he smelled something sweet and felt a tremendous urge to sleep. It was Débora and Elliot, who were already sneaking into that vassal's house through the window, using a magic powder to put everyone to sleep. And when the girl was crossing over, she got a cramp in her leg and realized that she would hardly be able to get down. For Elliot, that wasn't a problem. He asked the lady to stay still while he took care of it. Débora also understood that right now, for her assistant, she was more of a dead weight. Although even she didn't expect the account book to be in such a strange place. Soon Elliot found what they were looking for, but just as they were about to leave, someone noticed the sleeping guards. The boy asked the lady not to worry, that he would prepare the horse and distract the unwanted guests. And he asked her to hide in the opening they had seen a little while ago. It was quite narrow, but Débora hurried as much as she could so they wouldn't catch her leaving there. But the main problem was that she couldn't get on the horse alone. There was also no way back, when suddenly she saw feet in front of her. Looking up, Débora saw Duke Rogel again next to the carriage and was almost speechless with fright. But he just greeted her calmly and noticed that the lady was in quite a predicament. At first, the girl thought he had received the same information as her. But they could also be reporting every step she took. At that moment, voices were heard saying that the man on horseback, who was Elliot, could have an accomplice and must be found. Suddenly, the girl wished she were sleeping in her room, and that the encounter with the Duke was just a nightmare. But first, she had to get rid of the guards following her. It was clear that Rahul didn't plan to hand her over, so she quickly got into his carriage. Clutching the account book in her hands, Bakal noticed the book, and also that the lady seemed to enjoy always running away. Débora didn't understand why that guy couldn't stay quiet and listen, and she explained that it wasn't her business who would be her family's heir. So he didn't have to worry so much. Rahul said again that he liked to meddle in those kinds of things, and for the lady to understand. He clarified that she always asked questions, and he was just curious about her. And that trying to make sense of everything and wrapping up the unknown only gave him a headache. He had no other motive, he just wanted to get to know Lady Mergen better. Débora thought it was complete nonsense. The Duke, she knew, would never say something like that. Suddenly, they stopped the carriage and explained that they had to check it because a thief had snuck into the mansion. The coachman shouted at the guards, explaining that someone very important was in the coach. But they weren't going to let him pass. Seeing their reaction, Débora worried they might find the account book. Suddenly, the Duke took off his cloak and covered the girl with it. Then, he opened the carriage door on the other side, hiding his face as if he were a secret lover. Then he shouted at the guards, asking why they wanted him to reveal his secret because of a simple thief. At the same time, he squeezed Débora so close to him that she started getting nervous. When the guards saw it was the Duke, they started trembling and he demanded they let him pass. At that moment, all the knights disappeared as if nothing had happened. Without further problems, Rehan wanted to ask Débora something, but she felt like she couldn't straighten her neck. Still, she was curious to know what he wanted to ask, and it turned out the Duke was interested in knowing what soap she used. The question not only seemed silly to her, but also it wasn't the best time to talk about it. Débora tried to sit up, but only felt pain in every bone and muscle. And then she collapsed onto the Duke's knees, losing consciousness. Raham thought she had fallen asleep, but then deduced it was a simple faint due to stress. Then they knocked on the carriage door and reported that Mills was meeting with Roosevelt. The Duke thanked the soldier, who had courage but not much stamina. Afterward, he ordered them to head to the Mergen mansion. The Duke decided that this girl should deal with the consequences alone. During the trip, Débora woke up and worried when she realized she was lying on her back, with her head on the Duke's knees. She sat up suddenly, realizing she was in an uncomfortable situation. He just smiled, thinking that no woman had ever slept so deeply in his arms before. But he understood that she was exhausted and fell asleep. Judging by the furious face Débora made at that moment, it seemed like the empire was about to fall. The girl knew she had to go quickly to see her grandfather, because Uncle Millis was going to look for another method. Rehan asked her not to worry, and confessed that his uncle was meeting with Roosevelt. And he told her to take that information as a gift from him, much better than a ring. Or flowers. Upon reaching the mansion entrance, the Duke was the first to get down and offered his hand to Lady Mergen. But on the first step, Débora lost her balance because she was still weak. And Rahan asked her to lean on him. Stubborn as she was, the girl decided she could manage alone, but she was wrong and ended up falling right into the Duke's arms. And he confessed that his heart broke every time he saw her faint like that. Débora just wanted to leave there as soon as possible, because being close to the Duke, she started losing control. And that was not good in her situation. But just then Abel appeared, curious to know where his sister had gone in the middle of the night. Débora didn't understand why he had to appear right now, when she couldn't be seen before visiting the head of the house. But the Duke intervened again, and, hugging the lady, advised Abel to be careful with such questions. Then, as if promising, he said that the lady herself would tell about her mysterious night encounter. Débora feared that the Duke was only pretending to help her, and was actually waiting for the moment to get her into trouble. But then she thought about Abel calling her sister, which seemed very strange to her, and immediately told him that he didn't need explanations about what she was doing. However, Abel couldn't stay calm knowing that she was meeting Duke Vahel himself at night. Débora couldn't understand that concern of his. Rehan realized that the relationship between these relatives left much to be desired. Soon, the head of the house gathered the vassals in the middle of the night, which left them quite confused. But upon seeing Lady Mergen in the hall, they understood that this girl was plotting something again. Lady Chloe was also there, whose face clearly showed her nervousness. Everyone came except Mr. Roosevelt. At that moment, a vassal approached Chloe to inform her of something important. Débora noticed them whispering and told them they should work on themselves. Then, Chloe furiously asked who was behind Irene, thinking she was acting on someone's orders. But no one paid attention to her, and just at that moment, the head of the family entered. Slamming his hand on the table, the old man demanded to know who dared to falsify the accounting book. And if anyone present was involved, they should confess immediately. Everyone started protesting, saying it was crazy, but Débora explained that they found that book in Uncle Mill's mansion, along with the fake book, and the vassals were surprised, not understanding how he could do such a thing. Débora continued by saying that the situation was indeed serious, and that it would affect the vassals. The grandfather also kept threatening, saying he couldn't let it go, especially since the traitor was a relative. At that moment, Roosevelt ran breathlessly into the hall, explaining that he was late because he was deeply asleep. Débora knew that wasn't true, and there was no need to wonder why Uncle Mills himself didn't show up. She asked that the traitors be treated according to the family code. The grandfather agreed and said that, according to that rule, Mills would be expelled from the family. And he would pay for his crime. Débora wanted to say something more and apologized to her grandfather for interrupting him. And she recalled how they manage their business so they can control each other. But with that system, it is difficult to maintain control, so some took advantage of that blind spot. Therefore, the best thing would be to give control of all mining to one person. Roosevelt began to protest, saying that made no sense. And Débora asked again to be given the authority, arguing that she was tasked with investigating the case. The others also began to complain, but the girl knew it wouldn't be easy. And she was already prepared. To calm the situation, she proposed holding a vote. Everyone present had to vote for who should take control. Meanwhile, she held in her hand a stack of evidence of the corruption of the vassals gathered there. They scratched their heads, knowing it was unlikely any of them would get that important position. Everyone sat around the table. Now all that remained was to await the decision of the head of the family.